Can the hatred and bitterness sown by years of war simply vanish the moment the guns fall silent? Can the spirit of humanity rise to the surface again, pushing past the pain and destruction caused by the very hands you once fought? Our story today revolves around this question exactly. It's a tale that even those who lived it found hard to believe. This is the story of the German prisoners of war, the Wehrmacht soldiers who fought Britain fiercely, only to find themselves, after World War II, working deep in the English countryside. They weren't just working as captives, they were accepted, even welcomed, as a practical, necessary part of the daily life in the rural communities that were supposed to hate them forever. In 1945, when the echoes of the cannons finally faded, Britain faced a severe crisis. Victory tasted sweet, but the aftermath was bitter. The men who normally worked the fields were either gone or busy trying to rebuild their shattered lives. Britain desperately needed hands to ensure its people wouldn't starve after years of rationing and war. At the same time, the country held nearly 400,000 German POWs, mostly young men, waiting in camps for repatriation to their homeland, which was now mostly rubble. The government's decision was harsh but pragmatic. These prisoners would stay. They would not be sent home immediately despite the requirements of the Geneva Convention. Instead, they would be utilized to fill the massive labor shortage, especially in agriculture. For the British government, it was a practical necessity, but for the POWs and for the British civilians who received them, it was an experience that would redefine their understanding of war, peace, and shared humanity. Imagine yourself as one of these German soldiers. You spent years fighting or in captivity, convinced that you are the despised enemy. Suddenly, the truck door opens and you are dropped off at a simple English farm. No barbed wire, no watchtowers, just mud and countryside. And you stand face to face with an English family, maybe an older woman who lost her son, fighting against you, or a simple farmer who saw his house bombed by German planes. What do you expect? Spit? Shouting? Cruel treatment? This is exactly what the German soldiers expected. They were conditioned to the idea of total enmity. But what happened was totally unexpected. Initially, there were barriers: the language barrier, the barrier of expected hatred, and the barrier of fear. England's rural communities were fiercely close-knit and patriotic. It was difficult on both sides. The prisoners, still wearing uniforms marked POW, had to deal with wary and fearful glances. And the farmers had to decide, is this young man, still bearing the hardened look of a soldier, truly an enemy, or just a hungry human being in need of work? What began to break the ice wasn't a government decree. It was the sheer simplicity of daily life. English farmers were in desperate need of help. The harvest season doesn't wait. Cows need milking, fields need plowing. And the German prisoners often possessed high practical skills. Many were farmers or skilled laborers before the war. This shared circumstance, hard work on the land, created an unexpected bond. Imagine the English farmer pointing to instruct the POW on a task, and then sharing a hot cup of tea during a break, even though neither understood each other's language except through gestures. These small moments were the beginning of a profound shift. Friendship wasn't immediate, but respect started to form. The prisoners began to see that the British weren't the demonic monsters the Nazi propaganda machine had described. And the farmers started to see that these young soldiers were just other victims of the war, far from home, missing their families. Working together changed the dynamic entirely. When you toil side by side for long hours under the summer sun or the winter cold, the military uniform or the prisoner's badge disappears. What remains is the shared sweat and the single goal: getting the job done. But the question remains, how did this practical respect transition into full social acceptance? And what are the astonishing stories that emerged from these farms proving that compassion ultimately triumphed over revenge? That is what we will explore in the next part, as we dive deeper into how private British homes began to welcome these prisoners, and how personal relationships, even romantic ones, started to blossom, to an extent that none of the German POWs themselves could ever have believed. Until late 1946, the German POWs were mostly confined to their camps or brought to the fields under strict supervision. They worked, they ate, they went back to the barracks. But then a quiet, unofficial revolution began in the English countryside. The British government, recognizing the need for better morale among the prisoners and the desire for more flexible labor arrangements, began to relax the rules. First, it was permission for certain trusted, politically clean prisoners, those considered non-Nazis, to work further afield. Then came the true game changer, the decision to allow POWs to visit British homes, especially around Christmas 1946. Imagine the tension of that first visit. A knock on the door, and there stands a young German soldier, maybe one who spent the last 3 years in a uniform that represented destruction to the family inside. The family invites him in. They sit down to tea and biscuits. The air is thick with unspoken history. But in these tiny, intimate moments, the war truly ended for many people. When you sit across the table, not as the German or the enemy, but just as another young man, the shared human experience takes over. The British family saw their own sons, brothers, and husbands in these young men. They saw their homes, their mothers, their wives. For the German POWs, this hospitality was utterly bewildering. They were expecting to be kept at arm's length, viewed with suspicion, perhaps even given the worst leftovers. Instead, they were offered the best chair by the fire, a proper meal, and conversation, even if it was clumsy and slow. They couldn't believe it. This was not how they had been taught enemies behaved. This was Christian charity, pure and simple, extended across the divide of total war. The acceptance went even deeper. Many of the POWs, particularly those assigned to remote farms, were eventually given permission to live on the farm with the family rather than commuting back to the main camp every night. They were essentially billeted with their former enemies. Think of the trust involved here. A farmer whose home was his sanctuary, whose wife and daughters lived there, willingly inviting a former combatant to stay under his roof. This wasn't just about labor anymore. It was about filling the empty seat at the dinner table left by a missing son. It was about companionship and the simple need for normalcy. These young men who came as prisoners quickly integrated into the fabric of daily life. They helped with chores, played with the children, and even attended local church services. They became part of the local landscape. They taught the children German songs, and the children taught them English slang. One of the most powerful and tangible examples of this integration was the emergence of relationships, even romance. With hundreds of thousands of British men still away or trying to re-establish themselves, and hundreds of thousands of young German men present and working hard, personal bonds were inevitable. Imagine the courage it took for a British girl to fall for a man still officially classified as an enemy. Imagine the gossip in the village, the disapproval from some quarters, yet love blossomed. The most famous example is Berk Trautmann, a German paratrooper captured in the war. He was detained near Manchester, started playing football for a local team, and later married a local girl. He went on to become a legendary goalkeeper for Manchester City, winning the FA Cup final with a broken neck. His life is a testament to how deep the roots of reconciliation grew. These personal stories showed the world that the war was a conflict between governments, not necessarily between people. The POWs weren't just building up British farms, they were building bridges of genuine human connection. One shared meal, one repaired fence, and one shy smile at a time. But this astonishing level of acceptance and integration raised difficult questions. As the years went by and Germany slowly began to recover, the time for repatriation finally arrived. Which would these men choose? The war-torn home they barely remembered, or the new life, the new family, and the welcoming farms of England?
The choices they made and the long-lasting impact they had on both nations is the final compelling chapter of this unique story.
We've seen the incredible journey, from fierce enemies arriving as prisoners to becoming trusted farmhands and even guests in British homes. The physical labor broke the ice, and the shared humanity around the dinner table forged the bonds of respect and love. But as 1947 turned into 1948, the time came for the last and perhaps most difficult decision of this whole amazing story: repatriation. The British government, having used the German workforce for critical post-war reconstruction, finally began the large-scale process of sending the men home. Truckloads of young men who had arrived full of bitterness and fear were now leaving with tears in their eyes, a strange mix of joy for their homeland and deep sadness for the life they were leaving behind. But for thousands of these men, the choice was not simple. Their homeland, Germany, was devastated. Cities were bombed, the economy was non-existent, and the country was politically split. Many of the POWs who came from what would become the Soviet-controlled East Zone knew that returning could mean a different but equally grim kind of captivity. England, on the other hand, offered stability, peace, work, and most importantly, connection. Many had built real relationships with their host families, with their fellow workers, and in a significant number of cases, with local women. The government, still desperate for labor, finally introduced a scheme. German POWs could apply to be discharged from prisoner status and remain in Britain as civilian workers. The response was overwhelming. About 30,000 men applied for permission to stay. Think about that number. 30,000 young men who had been conditioned to see Britain as the ultimate enemy actively chose to make their future life with the families they had fought against. This wasn't forced labor anymore. This was a choice of the heart. Ultimately, around 25 of them were accepted to stay. This single fact speaks volumes about the power of the human spirit to overcome manufactured hate. These men were a walking, breathing testament to successful grassroots reconciliation. They stayed, married, raised families, and became integrated into British life, contributing to the very country they had once fought to destroy. For the British communities, it was a moment of true grace. They had chosen to see past the uniform, past the label of enemy, and recognize the shared humanity underneath. They had acted on a deep, almost scriptural principle of welcoming the stranger, even one who was once a foe. It wasn't always easy, and there was pushback in some areas, but in the heartland of the British countryside, kindness won. This story, the one that German POWs themselves found impossible to believe, is a powerful echo from the past. It reminds us that wars end not just with signed treaties, but with acts of quiet, personal mercy. It shows us that when you break bread with your supposed enemy, and when you sweat together over a shared goal, the walls of division crumble naturally. These 25,000 men, the former soldiers who stayed and became fathers, husbands, and neighbors, were the living foundation of the reconciliation between Britain and Germany. Their descendants live in the UK today, a constant reminder that the greatest victory in war is not the crushing of an enemy, but the rediscovery of a brother. And that brings us to the end of this incredible chapter in history. Thank you so much for listening to this story on Battle Echoes. We hope that this tale of unexpected kindness and deep human connection gave you something powerful to think about. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to our channel for more forgotten echoes of history, and drop a comment below. We love hearing from you. Let us know what other unique or overlooked wartime stories you would like us to cover next. Do you have a story about reconciliation, a forgotten battle, or perhaps a hero from a country we haven't featured yet? Leave your ideas below.
Until next time, keep exploring the hidden stories of the past.